is a major day for the Democratic Party. Very soon, Maine Democrats will choose a new nominee for the U.S. Senate to replace Graham Plattner. A nominating convention has already begun, where 601 delegates will vote on the last two standing candidates. Former State Senator Troy Jackson and Bioscience CEO Sandra Pelletier, both candidates, will give roughly 5-minute speeches before the voting begins, and we will bring you live coverage of the convention as it happens. According to Jackson's campaign, hundreds of delegates have already pledged to back him, which makes him the overwhelming favorite to face off against Republican incumbent Senator Susan Collins. It's a race that is currently rated as a toss-up and could be key to the Democratic Party's chances of winning back the Senate majority. And a new poll from the University of New Hampshire shows that Jackson has just a slight edge over Collins in a head-to-head matchup. Joining us now from the nominating convention in Bangor, Maine, is MS Now chief political reporter Chris Jansing. Chris, talk to us about what we're expecting today and what the interview's like in that room you're in.
Yeah, a lot of energy, but can we just talk about how wild this is? I have been covering politics for decades, never anything like this. We're 101 days out from what is one of the most consequential elections of this midterm. Some people would say the most consequential, to try to beat long-term incumbent Susan Collins. And it's going to be a couple of hours before we officially know who's going to be running against her. Having said that, I spoke to a lot of people in line as they were coming in. And can I just show you a little bit around this room? If you look to my right, it kind of looks like when you've been to a national political convention, except instead of states, you're looking at the counties, the 16 counties that are here. And then it's at that podium where we, in about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, we expect all the paper ballots to have been counted from these delegates and for them to officially get this race underway. But I talked to a couple of them as they were coming in, and they are optimistic. Take a listen.
I think he represents working class Mainers. He represents parts of Maine that often aren't brought into politics. And I love the way he connects solidarity with LGBTQ communities, people of color, women's health. So just really like that focus on solidarity and supporting people who are in need of support.
Who are you here to support?
Troy Jackson.
Why?
Because I really need health care. I have a heart condition. I was born with it, and it's something that is definitely needed for me. I'm in incredible debt because of it.
There are going to be two key things to watch besides Troy Jackson, again, the overwhelming favorite, who is expected to walk out of here and go into one of the toughest races that we have ever seen. But first of all, you mentioned, Eugene, that poll. A lot of folks here taking comfort in the fact that already before they even have an official nominee, that they're beating Susan Collins. Susan Collins has the lowest approval ratings that she has had through her 29 years in the Senate, but this is exactly what they think is going to be a big factor in this race. When they put out a call for folks who wanted to be delegates, they got 20,000 people responding, and they have been working from that very moment to get these folks activated. They think this is going to be won in a door-to-door, person-to-person, Mainer-to-Mainer kind of way. Second part of that is money. I've been talking to a lot of folks who raise money both on the national level and on the state level over the last couple of days. The estimates I'm getting are a mind-boggling $250 to $400 million race. The other thing is Susan Collins has often been outspent, and she still won. So it's not just about how much money you raise, but how you use it. A lot of that will be on the ground game. And by the way, guys, this is a small state. There are only 3 media markets, so an awful lot of that airtime is already accounted for. That leaves money for the ground game and other ways in which you're going to run these campaigns. Back to you.
Chris, we think that we can feel the energy in the room. I think my question for you, as you travel the state, what is the energy across the state amongst the general electorate? Are people paying attention? Are they tuned into this race just yet?
You can't not be, all right? Because if you turn on television, when I got into my hotel room a couple of days ago, I turned on television. The first thing I saw were several Susan Collins ads. It's really interesting to watch the difference between the ads that her campaign pays for and that the outside groups paid for. Hers are about the constituent services she provides. The other ones have been attacks on her previous opponent, Graham Plattner, and now they're gearing up to go against Troy Jackson. Having said that, I think that there is an understanding of the stakes that's very different. And the two things I hear all the time here are Susan Collins's vote to support ICE. And I went over to the place where a 25-year-old man was shot and killed by an ICE agent. And there were people still, 10 days more after that shooting, who were going there extremely emotional, talking about the impact that has had on this state and on that community. And again, knowing Susan Collins voted to fund ICE, and in fact, she's the head of the Appropriations Committee. The other thing I keep hearing, and not just from women, by the way, is Susan Collins' support for her anti-abortion stand, and the fact that Troy Jackson, who once held a very similar view, now is very much in favor of reproductive rights. Reproductive rights is driving a lot of what we're going to see with the women's vote. When Susan Collins ran 6 years ago, she got a bigger percentage than she had in the past against a Democratic opponent. They think they can amp that up significantly. Again, a lot of that is going to be talking person to person, door to door. One last point I'll make. They're not under any illusion that Susan Collins isn't a tough candidate. And so there is a nervousness, but they're saying they're turning that into determination. Every person I talk to who is a Democrat, who is here at this convention, and people I've talked to out in the community who plan to vote for Troy Jackson, when I say to them, are you going to get involved? They say, of course, and whatever it takes, make phone calls, go door to door. So I think when they say they're going to have an army of people who are willing to work to win this, at least in my couple of days here, 2.5 days, that's what I'm hearing.
Chris Jansing, we are very excited to tune into special this afternoon at 4 p.m. See you soon. And joining us now is Kirby Williams. He's the politics editor for the Portland Press-Herald. He is also at the convention in Bangor, Maine. Kirby, I know there's a lot of unknowns here, but I do want to try to game out just how much of an impact this process is going to have on Democrats' electoral chances once a candidate is picked.
Yeah, I mean, it's not good, right? It's not good to not have a candidate until 101 days before the election. But I also think that this nomination process and this convention that we're at here today is the first step in Troy Jackson uniting the party behind him. And it's kind of a unique opportunity. There isn't normally a chance for a candidate like this to gather all of the diehard Dems in one room, make the case, have a sort of show of support, and say, let's go win this thing.
One of the things that has been covered by your paper quite a bit is Jackson's alleged temper and it being a liability, something that has gone back years. Trump kind of alluded to it yesterday in a crass way. It's been in some of the circles here in Washington, D.C. when I've been talking to folks. After what they just went through in Maine with Graham Plattner, is any of that getting any real airtime inside over the last couple of weeks as Democrats have kind of figured out who they want their person to be? Is it a concern that they have at all?
In some ways, yes, because of what you said, what they just went through with Graham Plattner, right? Like, they had a candidate who wasn't properly vetted, and he was sunk by things that came out of his past. But mostly, honestly, not really, because Troy Jackson is a pretty known quantity, especially among Democratic voters here. He was the Senate president for 6 years. He was the Senate state leader for 8 years. He's been in the legislature for 20 years. People know him around here, and I don't think there's as much fear that things are going to come out about his past as there was with a complete unknown like Graham Plattner. I think what you're seeing from the coverage about his anger, that's more him being introduced to a national audience, which is still important. It's still important for fundraising. It's still important so donors know whether he's a viable candidate. But people in Maine, I think they know Troy Jackson.
Hey, Kirby, I want to talk to you, if I can, about outreach in the rural parts of Maine. I grew up in a one-stoplight town, not in Maine, in the rural South, but my point is that there are a lot of times people who live in these communities don't feel connected to politics or certainly not to state parties. So my question to you, I think if Democrats are really going to get this over the finish line, it's going to be because not just independents and affiliated voters, but those voters and voters in more rural parts of the state. So can you talk a little bit about has the Democratic Party made any investments in rural Maine that could possibly pay off in November?
Absolutely. The biggest investment they've made is they've had a congressman represent the rural 2nd District since 2018 in Jared Golden. Now, he's not running for re-election this cycle, but they've had a Democratic presence in that part of the state, exactly where you're talking about, for a long time. And it's kind of a bellwether district. It's the kind of district that Democrats have lost all over the country, but they've hung on to here in Maine. I think nominating Troy Jackson is going to be a lot what the doctor ordered as far as reaching rural voters. He's from Allagash, Maine, in the most rural part of the state. He won a rural state Senate district there as recently as 2022 when, that place was going for Trump by 20, 30 points. Now, I will caution, a state Senate seat with 20,000 voters is not the same as a statewide U.S. Senate seat where there's going to be, as your reporter said, $250 million spent on the race. But I think if they want to have a shot at winning some of those skeptical rural voters, Troy Jackson's about as good as they can do. But I would counter with one thing. I actually think this race is going to be a lot more about galvanizing the Democratic base, linking Susan Collins to Republicans and Donald Trump, than it is about swaying people who are MAGA and diehard Trump, or maybe activating inactive voters. I think this is going to be about galvanizing the Democrats, and that's what the Democrats are here to do today in Bangor.